Hello ladies and gentlemen, it is approximately 6 degrees out, mid-January, and today we're going to be doing some 6-volt diagnosis. Now you could do this with any old classic car, tractor, military vehicle, anything with a 6-volt system. You can follow these steps to figure out why it may or may not be charging. So let's get into it. First thing with a 6-volt we start with is the 6-volt battery. As you know, everything newer than 1954 and most makes and models is a 12-volt system. They are proven to be fairly unreliable to that point, so everything is now 12 volts. So, looking at our sign here, we want to check our battery first. Make sure it's fully charged, around 6.3 to 6.4 volts. So we're going to start there. This right here is a EVOM. You put it to your voltage setting. See your two leads. You can see that very well from your angle. Positive, negative. It'll tell us there. 6.48 volts. So that is literally a fully charged, perfectly good, ready to go battery here. So that being said, let's get the car started so we can follow our next step of figuring out how much voltage it's at when the car is running. Now that the car is running, you'll be able to check your voltage. You should have around 6.25 volts at idle. And when we rev up the car a bit, we should go to 7 or 7.5 at roughly 1200 RPM. So right now we're at idle, so we'll see what the battery is reading at. You look here. You're sitting at 6.32 volts, which isn't too bad. So I'm going to rev up the car a bit here, and we're going to see what that reading goes to. So as you can see, the voltage did not change at all, which indicates that we have a charging issue. So we're going to follow the next steps and see what's going on. Our list here to check is going to be the wiring, because a car this old, normally your wiring is either going to be really corroded, or maybe mice or pack rats got in there and chewed it up in half, so maybe we have no connection going anywhere. That's good. So we'll start by coming over to the voltage regulator, the generator down here. So here we have our generator. There's two wires that go to the generator for a field terminal and an armature terminal. So we're going to check first the wiring from this point up to our regulator over here, because there's two wires that go from those terminals to the field armature terminal on the regulator. So I'm going to unbolt those here. We're using a this is a 7/16 standard size socket. Okay, as you can see here, I have both my wires disconnected from the generator. One's going to be a field wire and one's going to be a generator wire. So how we're going to test these is, we're going to test them using our voltmeter, using the resistance or ohms gauge. So 2 clicks up shows resistance. Now, if this reading is 0, that means there is nothing stopping the current from flowing between these wires, which is good. If it reads higher than 0 or OFL like this, it is an open or bad circuit, so current would not be flowing how it should. So we're going to take one lead from this wire right here, make sure that's touching, making good contact, up to our generator. So if you can see that, it reads 0 ohms of resistance, which means our wire is good on the armature side. So now we're going to try testing the field terminal side. Same deal there. Got my one end touching that and one end at the regulator here. As you can read, also 0 ohms, which means these wires are in good shape, which is actually very surprising. The next one we're going to test here is making sure our battery positive terminal has a good connection from our generator to our battery. If it does not, that means our battery would not even be getting anything to charge in the first place. So same deal here. We're on resistance. One end is going to touch the battery positive right here. Make sure you got a good connection in there. Same deal. Go into the battery terminal on the generator, or sorry, regulator down here. Okay, here we go. We are at 0 ohms, which means we have a perfect flow of current from our regulator battery terminal to our battery positive. So we should have perfect flow in this circuit. If it wasn't perfect or 0 like that, we'd probably have bad corrosion or rust, which would mean that would be causing a major charging issue. So that's out of the way, so we know our wiring is all good. Charging problem is the charging gauge. So maybe you think your gauge isn't working at all. So we can see here our gauge sits on a little bit over to discharge. So maybe our gauge isn't working at all. We wouldn't know because when we press the gas, normally the gauge would go up to charge. So when I normally press the gas, nothing happens. So we're going to test if our gauge is working by doing what we call a regulator bypass to see if the regulator is working, also to see if our gauge is working. So we're going to take our jumper wires like this. We're going to connect the field terminal on our regulator to a known good ground. Whether that be on the battery or on the engine block somewhere, it has to be a good ground. So this way we're bypassing it to see if our gauge actually works. So our field terminal is the very top post on the regulator. So I'm going to hook to that using our jumper wire and connect to a good ground. So in this case, I'm just going to use our battery negative ground terminal. Make sure I have a good connection there. Follow me over to the gauge again. We're going to watch the gauge go up when I press the gas. So as you saw, our gauge went up, which means we know our gauge is a good working gauge, which indicates we have more problems in the gauge or the wiring, which leads us to our next step, testing the regulator and the generator. All right, the next test we're going to do here is going to be a regulator test. So the first step here is to grab a test light, connect your battery positive to the case of the regulator to make sure that it is grounded. If the regulator is not grounded, it won't work at all. So watch the light in there. You can see it's very dimly lit, which means that, if you compare it to this, yeah, it's lit how it should be. So our regulator is grounded, so that's a good sign there. So now we move on to the next step in testing our regulator. Okay, the next part to the regulator test is to repeat the gauge test. So we're going to repeat our regulator bypass here. This time I'm going to show you guys with the gauge, or with the voltmeter, what that looks like with our voltage. So as you can see here, idling, we are 6.27, not bad. So we're going to grab our 1 lead of our jumper wire to the field terminal on the regulator. I can reach it. And the other end to a known good ground, if I can get this one lined out. Alright, so we're going to watch our gauge here as I rev the engine to about 1,000 RPMs, 1,200 RPMs. Should go up to like 12 or 7 or so. As you see, it's going up past 7. So that right there indicates that when we bypass our regulator, our generator is in fact putting out voltage. So that right there indicates to me that our regulator has a problem, even though it is a brand new one. So it most likely needs to be adjusted. But in case that didn't do anything, and let's say I did that test but the voltage stayed the same, that means there's a problem with our regulator. So we're going to go ahead and test our generator as if it were messed up. So the first step to check the generator is to make sure it's actually grounded. If it's not properly grounded, the circuit cannot be complete. So we're going to do a similar thing we did with the regulator. Put our test light here, battery positive to any ground here on the generator. So for starters there, you see it's lighting up. That's a good ground right there. Stab it down here into the paint. That's good. So I just freshly rebuilt this generator. So as you can see, there's some paint on there. Sometimes when you freshly paint these things, they won't make good connection. But as you can see here, our test light is in fact lighting up. So this thing has really good ground all throughout. So that's a good sign. All right, so the next step here, now that you know we have a good ground, is to check the output of our generator. So we're gonna make sure it's actually outputting a good amount of voltage when we rev the engine. So the first step here is to disconnect our field armature wire again, like we did with the other test there and the wiring test. We're going to put a jumper wire between those two terminals, and then with the car at roughly 800 to 1000 RPMs, we're going to put a voltmeter to the positive side, or the voltmeter positive to the generator terminal, and the ground side of the voltmeter is going to go to a ground on the generator. And so when we have those RPMs, we should be reading around 7 or 8 volts. If we were to read lower than that, our generator would not be outputting a good enough voltage. So as you can see here, again, I have the two field and armature wires disconnected from our generator. So I'm going to put them out of the way so they're not touching anything. You can see the terminals are down there, are bare. So we're going to grab our jumper wires here again. Oh shoot. I'm using the same color, so everything's red for this example. We're going to connect those two wires together to complete that circuit there. If I can get it to go on there. Make sure there's no rust on there. I just kind of going back and forth. All right, so I'm gonna put the battery back in the car for this next step here. Okay, now the battery's back in the car, we can connect our ground side here. Make sure we get connections there. So let's start the engine. So with our voltmeter on volts, I'm going to put this red lead on one of those terminals on the generator, and then the black lead to a ground on the generator too. Because anywhere on the paint or digging into the paint really works just fine for that step. Ooh, that's sketchy. Okay. So now we have a no good ground there. 0 volts reading about 0.7 right now, so we're going to rev it up here and see what it goes to.
Hey everybody, it's Future Caden here. After the strange voltmeter readings we got from the generator output test, I decided to go back and do some extensive research, and my research showed that our reading should have been at least 6, 7, or 8 volts, and we were barely getting 2 there. So that shows that our generator output is in fact bad. I kind of assumed while doing this out in the cold that my voltmeter settings might have been wrong, or maybe that voltage should have been added on top of the 6-volt battery, but I was incorrect. The generator output should be at least 7, 8 volts. So I'm likely going to revisit this and put on a remanufactured generator to see if that increases the output voltage. If not, then the issue is still in that regulator, but I am highly doubting that. I guess my remanufactured job on my generator was not as good as it could have been, so yep, just a heads up there.
The final way to test your generator, for example, if it wasn't already in the car and it was sitting loose on a bench, is by applying power to it and essentially turning it into a fan. So the first step here is to remove our belt so we can actually freely spin. So we're taking our 1/2-inch socket here. We're going to loosen up the tension around the generator. Alright, take our belt loose there. As you can see, it's off. I'm going to push this kind of back down so you guys can see this thing right here. So we have our fan and our pulley right there. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put our field terminal on our generator. So it's going to be the one farther over here. It's going to go to a good ground. So I'm going to clamp onto that. Also the wires, the 2 wires need to be disconnected for this step as well. So we're just going to put this to a ground right here, like we did earlier. So that's grounded. And then we're going to put our battery positive armature terminal, which is the other terminal remaining on the generator. So alligator clamp here, the other red alligator clamp, I'm going to get down there. And when I do this, the generator should start spinning to the armature terminal. It should spark and start spinning. So as you can see, our generator is in fact spinning, which is a good sign. So when I remove this ground one here, going to our field terminal, it should spin faster, which it does. So that indicates that our generator is working properly, which means my rebuild job was successful. So now that we know that our generator is working great, it means our issue is involved somewhere in that voltage regulator on the firewall there. Alright everybody, thank you guys for tuning in for today's episode of how to diagnose your 6-volt charging issues. These steps here will work on anything with a 6-volt generator, battery, or regulator, whether that be a tractor, some sort of military vehicle, or a pre-war car with a 6-volt battery in it. You can do it yourself at home using some basic tools like test leads, voltmeters, a test light, and a couple of sockets. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.